Good morning, everybody. It's another beautiful Tuesday, and I'm thankful you've joined me for today's devotion. As part of our Bible reading plan at First Baptist, we are in Numbers chapter 16 in the Old Testament. I hope you've already read the chapter. And in this story of the rebellion by a certain group against Moses and Aaron, there are some really important lessons that I think apply to us today that speak to a lot of the thinking and preaching that is prevalent in Christianity today that needs to be corrected. In this story, in chapter 16, what we have are some of the Levites who lead a revolt, a rebellion, if you will, against Moses and Aaron. Now, remember, the Levites were the descendants of Levi, one of the tribes of Israel, and they were the servants. Going forward, they would be the servants, if you will, at the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, in the future in the temple. They would be the ones to assist the priests. Now, the priests were descendants of Aaron. Aaron was a Levite, so what you had is a select group of Levites, Aaron and his descendants who were the priests, and the rest of the Levites were like the people who would take care of the temple, or at this point in time, the tabernacle, the maintenance. They would be the choir. They would be the servants, the helpers, if you will. And there's a group of them who rebel against Moses and Aaron. In verse 3, they assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Aaron, why are you and your sons, your descendants, the priests? Why not the rest of us? Moses, who made you boss?" They were challenging the leadership of Moses and Aaron, and early on indicate they did not like the way Moses and Aaron were leading them. You drop down to verse 8. Then Moses said to Korah, he was the leader of this rebellion, "Hear now, you sons of Levi, is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them?" What I was saying a moment ago, they were not priests, but they helped the priests. They were servants. They had a special position within Israel, all the Levites. Aaron and his sons were the priests, but the rest of the Levites still had a privileged position. And Moses says to them, "Is that not enough for you?" Now, verse 10, Moses continues speaking. "And that God has brought you near, Korah, and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you. And are you seeking for the priesthood also?" So you want more? Do you want to claim for yourself what God has given to Aaron and his descendants, the priesthood? That was really what they were wanting. They were wanting to replace Moses and Aaron. They thought they deserved more leadership. But the real issue, that was part of it. That was the surface issue. And brothers and sisters, a lot of times the surface issue that someone brings up is not the real issue. The deeper issue was the hardship that they and everyone there was experiencing during the wilderness wanderings. You drop down to verse 13. They are now speaking to Moses, the ones in the rebellion. "Is it not enough that you have brought us up out of the land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness?" Interesting. God described the promised land as a land flowing with milk and honey. The spies, the 12 spies, even the 10 negative spies said, yes, it is a land flowing with milk and honey. But here, these in rebellion look back to Egypt and refer to it as a land flowing with milk and honey. You brought us here in this desolate wilderness, this desert, to die. But you'd also lord it over us. You're acting like you're somebody, and all you're doing is killing us. He goes on to say in verse 14, "Indeed, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor have you given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up." In other words, what really was bothering them was that life was hard. Life was hard. And they had seen people die when they rebelled against God, and they didn't like it because the truth is, when they left Israel, when God rescued them from Egypt, when they left Egypt, they were spoiled. Now they had been slaves. Okay, life was hard. Had plenty to eat, but life was hard. Making bricks and so on. And God miraculously delivers them. And the Bible tells us in Exodus chapter 12, verse 36, that when they left Egypt, they plundered Egypt and took with them silver and gold and clothing. I mean, they took what they wanted from the Egyptians and left. They saw God do the miracle of the parting of the Red Sea and drowning the Egyptian army. And in Exodus 14:31, after that event, when Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. When it was going good, God had whipped the Egyptians. They had all the Egyptian silver and gold and clothing, and wow, they were on their way to the promised land. And they trusted God and they believed in Moses. Now they're out in the wilderness, and they were going to make it to the promised land, but they rebelled against God when the spies came back and God judged them and people died, and they're going to have to spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness, and now they're blaming God. And the truth is, not one person had died because of the hardship of the journey. Every person that died because of their rebellion and sin against God. But they didn't want to admit that. It's Moses' fault. It's Aaron's fault. You brought us out here, and life is hard. The gold and silver and clothing doesn't do us any good out here. We need water and food because we're in a desolate area. And God was providing manna and water from the rocks, but that wasn't enough. It wasn't in abundance. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't the prosperity. And so when it was hard, they rebelled against Moses as well as against the Lord. See, I think one of the takeaways is that there are a lot of people who claim to love Jesus just because of what Jesus does for them, and not because of who Jesus is. Prosperity gospel. Name it, claim it. God blesses, and sometimes I've known people who sin, who make bad decisions, and life gets hard. And rather than looking in the mirror and repenting of their sin and realizing they brought it on themselves, they blame God. Why isn't God blessing? Why isn't God getting me out of this mess? Why is God letting this happen to me? And it's all because of their own bad choices and their own sin. The same thing these Levites were doing. All the hardships they were enduring were their own fault for their own sin. And yet they were blaming Moses and they were blaming God, and they didn't want to take responsibility for anything. People today who treat God more like a Santa Claus. When you hear them preach on TV or you listen to them talk, it's like God's just about blessing you. And man, if you love Jesus, you're going to have everything you want. You're going to have the bigger house. You're going to have the better car. You're going to have the better job. But sometimes sin robs us of those things. And then other times God says, on the journey to the destiny I have for you, you've got to make some sacrifice along the way. You've got to go through some hard times along the way to get there. There are some lessons for us from Numbers 16. One is that losing your faith and grumbling when life gets hard just makes things worse, not better. Because these who rebelled against Moses and Aaron, they eventually died too under the judgment of God. Losing faith and grumbling doesn't fix things, it makes things worse. A second lesson is that negativity, a lack of faith, spreads like a virus and ends up killing, because after these men rebelled against Moses, God judged them. The earth opened up and swallowed them and then closed over them, buried them. Then later in chapter 16 and verse 41, on the next day, after God judged those men, on the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Spreads like a virus. Spreads like a virus and destroys. Third lesson, if not for God's mercy, we would all be dead. Jesus is not Santa Claus. He blesses, He guides, He helps. But He also asks you to climb on a cross and deny yourself, to sacrifice. And sometimes the journey to where God wants you to go is going to be hard. Other times, your journey is hard because of your own bad decisions and your own sin. Stop blaming God when you're the one who messed up. That's the sermon for today. I'll see you tomorrow.